If I may, I would appreciate an opportunity to speak about some information that's been coming out about primarily the current year's budget that we voted on last year, which I think may have some impact on what people see. It's probably going to be 15, 20 minutes. It's a bit long. Can I have that kind of grace to?
It's good by me. It's okay if we would let him read that in now?
Up to you.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
And just so you know, we'll listen to Mr. Malloy. We'll hear the presentation from staff, then we'll go to public comment.
I've decided to speak up today to address some information that has been publicly introduced regarding the fiscal year 2025 budget, which is our current budget year that we voted on last year, specifically related to projections of anticipated state funding. This issue was first raised by Scott Hogue in a video posted to his Scott for Post Falls Facebook page on July 24th. It was followed up by other posts, which included correspondence between him and Senator Doug Okunowicz. This has culminated in a letter sent by Senator Okunowicz to the Mayor and City Council of Post Falls, which has also been made public. First, I would like to say thank you to both Mr. Hogue and Mr. Okunowicz for discovering the error in the projections of state funding disbursements to the City of Post Falls for fiscal year 2025. We did not know there was an error, and because Mr. Hogue and Mr. Okunowicz noticed something goofy and spoke up, we were able to root cause the issue, get it fixed, and assure it never happens again. If that was where the story ended, it might have been the local politics feel-good story of the summer, concerned citizen working with a state senator and the local city council to solve a problem. Unfortunately, that's not how it ended, and honestly, that's not really how it began either. The posts and letters contain some massive inaccuracies coupled with innuendo and accusations that border on reputation destruction and character assassination. I normally make it a personal policy to stay out of local elections, except for the position I currently occupy, obviously, but I have to work with whomever wins, and I trust the voters to make the best decision. As you probably all know, Mr. Hogue is currently running for mayor of Post Falls, and Senator Okunowicz is serving on Mr. Hogue's campaign committee. However, given the sheer amount of disinformation that has been spread by both, somebody needs to speak up for the truth. I've chosen to do so for 3 reasons. First, I value my integrity and will not have it called into question based on falsehoods. 2, I don't want tonight's proceedings to be tainted by disinformation. And 3, I'm not running for anything this year, so I don't really have anything to gain by speaking up, unlike many of my colleagues who are running for election this year, so hopefully you all have more reason to trust what I'm presenting. That said, get comfortable because it's going to take a while. The problem, as Senator Okunowicz stated it in his letter, is that the reason the Post Falls City Council voted for a 7% tax increase last year was due to projections anticipating lower disbursements from the state. That was a reason, but far from the only one. I should note here that Senator Okunowicz's assertion that the 7% tax increase represents $1.459 million is false. That number includes tax revenues from new growth and annexations. Senator Okunowicz doesn't seem to understand that new growth means increased demand for city services, which obviously costs more money to provide, or he's being intentionally disingenuous by including those projected revenues into the 7% tax increase to paint us in the worst possible light. Either way, it's wrong. Incidentally, the correct number is right there in his letter, but he circled the wrong one. Before moving ahead with the reasoning for the increase, let's back up and answer a few questions about the projections themselves. First question, who makes the projections? Like most cities in Idaho, Post Falls is a member of the Association of Idaho Cities, or AIC. Among many other things, AIC provides projections of state funding disbursements tailored to each city's fiscal year, which often differ from the state's fiscal year, which is the case with Post Falls. Senator Okunowicz didn't know this until I told him last week. Mr. Hogue should know this, as he worked for the city for decades and was the head of the city's largest department for years and was heavily involved in the budgeting process. Anyway, the projections at hand here came from AIC. AIC's projections have historically been pretty darn accurate until it became virtually impossible for anyone to forecast anything starting in 2020 for obvious reasons. We haven't had any reason to doubt their projections until now. Were mistakes made in the fiscal year 2025 projections? Unfortunately, yes. Once Mr. Hogue and Senator Okunowicz brought the potential problem to the public's attention, city staff and the mayor have engaged in multiple conversations with AIC to investigate. AIC did find a calculation error which caused their projection to be about $900,000 lower than it otherwise would have been without the error. So again, I do offer a sincere thank you to Mr. Hogue and Senator Okunowicz for finding a problem, thereby enabling AIC to identify the cause and fix it so it doesn't happen again. What is the impact of this error? That's impossible to know at this point because Post Falls fiscal year 2025 is not over yet. Post Falls will continue to receive disbursements from the state until the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, so we won't know the actual receipts until October. Unfortunately, we have to vote on the fiscal year 2026 budget before fiscal year 2026 starts. That said, it is clear that Post Falls will receive substantially more than the faulty projection indicated, likely somewhere right around that $900,000 mark. To put that into perspective, that represents roughly 2% of the total budget. Projections are never 100% accurate. Nobody has a crystal ball that can see the future. Projections are educated guesses. This one, unfortunately, happened to be off by more than usual due to a calculation error by AIC. Also, state funding is by far the sole source of funding for the city. The city has dozens of sources of funding, all of which must be projected to do budgets. Sometimes they're over, sometimes they're under. Moving on, why did I vote for the 7% tax increase for fiscal year 2025? For me personally, inflation was the number one reason for supporting the tax increase. And incidentally, some of the numbers we saw in the workshop beforehand, and you may see tonight, are slightly different than this because I thought it had been 13 years since the Post Falls had a net tax increase. I was corrected later that it was 14 years. I didn't have time to adjust my numbers, so they're a little bit different. Anyway, Post Falls went 13 years without a net tax increase. That's 13 years. The cumulative effect of inflation during that period was 36.6%. We raised taxes by 7%, so we're still about 30% short of keeping up with inflation. And 3 of those 7% were one-year only increases for facilities, so that's coming off everyone's tax bill for fiscal 2026. Meaning, even if we vote for a 3% operations increase for fiscal year 2026, the overall tax bill will be flat from fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2026. More on this in a minute. For comparison, the cumulative tax increases for other neighboring cities between 2018, I ran out of time to go back any farther, and now are as follows. Coeur d'Alene, 13.6%, all ongoing. Hayden, 63.6%, which sounds goofy, but this includes a voter-approved levy override in 2023 to fund law enforcement. Rathdrum, 6%, all ongoing. Kootenai County, 11.83%, all ongoing. Post Falls, again, 7%, with 3% dropping off after fiscal 2025 and only 4% ongoing. Note that the different cities have different budgeting and accounting methodologies, so this isn't a perfect apples-to-apples comparison, but it does provide a general idea of what's been going on amongst the local municipalities over the last 8 years. And remember, Post Falls went 13 years without a net tax increase. Another reason is that the state legislature has squeezed the taxing authority of cities. House Bill 389 is the primary culprit. As Jeffrey Wardle put it in his May 21st, 2021 article in the Idaho Business Review, quote, HB 389 prevents growth from paying for itself. When undeveloped areas are improved, the assessed value of such increases and it generates more property tax revenue. Historically, taxing districts have been able to include such development in their budget calculations at 100% of the improved value, generating taxes to pay for services they consume. HB 389 limits the new value on the tax roll to 90% of the value for new construction and annexed property and 80% of the value of all properties in expiring urban renewal districts. Proponents argue that this provides tax relief for all taxpayers. Instead, it forces existing development, otherwise known as current taxpayers, to subsidize the new growth, unquote. So, since municipal authority to make new growth pay for itself has been limited by the state, we have to make up the difference by raising taxes on everyone. Senator Okunowitz voted in favor of this bill. In the interest of full transparency, there is an asterisk next to the 13 years without a net tax increase stat. After HB 389 took effect, since we could no longer tax the full value of new growth or newly closed urban renewal districts, we did the math and increased taxes on everyone just enough to cover the loss in the new growth revenue imposed by the state. Also, in response to case law indicating that streetlight operations and maintenance should be a tax rather than a fee, we did eliminate the streetlights fee and replace it with a tax back in 2017. The net effect was zero, basically taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other. So that's my asterisk on the 13 years without a tax increase, which is actually 14 years, I learned later. HB 389 also limits cities' access to foregone taxation authority to 1% for operational purposes and 3% for facilities, the latter of which expires after 1 year and does not add to the city's budget basis. Thus, last year's 7% increase is only 4% ongoing beyond the current year. It used to be my philosophy that we not collect additional tax revenue unless and until we absolutely, positively have to do so. But with new limits on cities' authority to raise funds, it is now more prudent to raise the funds we are very likely to need before we absolutely, positively need to, rather than have the city skid into the financial ditch should something unforeseen happen, as it often does. Limiting foregone taxing authority punishes cities that have been historically frugal, as those cities who tend to exercise their full taxing authority every year don't have much of a foregone balance anyway. There appears to be a growing sentiment in Boise that foregone taxing authority should be eliminated altogether, which further pushes cities to exercise what's left of their taxing authority sooner than later, because it may not be there at all in the future if and when they need it. Another reason I supported the tax increase was that our budget was bolstered by the closure of multiple urban renewal districts during that 13-year span. There aren't any other districts slated to close in the next 15 years, so we can't count on that income anytime soon, and the state has limited the taxable value of that growth, as I already noted. Yet another reason is that some federal funding sources, see primarily ARPA, that carried the city through COVID without having to raise property taxes went away. And yes, the projections from AIC showing a decrease in state disbursements was another reason I supported the tax increase. Unfortunately, we know now that those projections were miscalculated for fiscal year 2025. That doesn't make any of the other above problems go away, though. I still likely would have supported the increase without the miscalculation. I should point out again that projections are never accurate. For fiscal year 2024, actual receipts from state revenue sharing were about $450,000 below projections, so we had to make up for that too. Although, as I mentioned before, we didn't have that exact number until after we passed the fiscal year 2025 budget. During the recent discussion with the city, AIC mentioned that it is difficult to provide revenue projections for the highway user funds, as the general fund portion is discretionary and it can vary depending on the year and how much the legislature determines they will fund to this account. So what the state giveth, the state can taketh away. Anyway, I expressed all of these things at public meetings during last year's budget process, and Senator Okunowicz chose to cherry pick part of one comment I made and publicly hit me over the head with it, which I don't appreciate. Run it like a business. This is what was asked of me when I was first asked to run for the Post Falls City Council and what I promised to do when I was elected. I don't believe it is prudent to run a business by the seat of one's pants, living only for the moment. Budgeting conservatively and planning ahead for unforeseen circumstances is the only way to run a business, in my opinion. Planning only for the current year and with the expectation that everything is always going to go exactly as planned is a recipe for ruin. Planning and budgeting can be extremely complicated, so please allow me to oversimplify. Say I own a business. I have to try to predict two things: how much money is going to come in and what my expenses are going to be. I recently had my building inspected, and the inspector said I will need to replace the roof in about 5 years. I get an estimate for a new roof, which is about $30,000. So what's the best thing to do? Don't worry about it until it springs a leak, wait 5 years and then borrow $30,000 and add interest payments to my expenses for multiple years, or start planning for it now? To me, the answer is obvious. I budget to set aside $6,000 per year for the next 5 years. I project that my revenues will be $100,000 this year and all our expenses to be $94,000. Fast forward a year and miraculously everything happened exactly as I predicted. I go into the next year sitting on $6,000, which is earmarked for the new roof. For the next budget year, I again project $100,000 in revenue and $94,000 in expenses and plan to set aside another $6,000 to go towards the roof. Now it appears that my budget has increased by $6K, even though I made no changes to projected revenues or expenses, because the $6K I socked away for the roof the previous year rolled over into the current year's budget. Fast forward another year, I had a really good year and revenues were all up by $3,000. What's the prudent conservative thing to do? Hand out $100 bills to the first 30 customers that come through the door, or add that extra $3,000 to the roof fund? Personally, I would add it to the roof fund. It was predicted that my roof would last another 3 years from this point, but predictions are never perfect. It could last longer, it could fail sooner. And it could cost more than $30K by the time I actually replace it because inflation sucks. So I rolled the $6K from the previous year plus the $9K from the current year into the following year. I predict the same $100K in revenue and $94K in expenses, but now it appears my budget is up to $115,000, $21K of which, of course, is the roof fund, $15K having rolled over from the previous 2 years. Fast forward 6 months, and oh no, a fire starts in the bathroom, causing $3,000 in damages. What's the conservative and prudent thing to do? Shake down my customers for an extra $3,000, or use $3,000 from the roof fund to fix the bathroom? Fortunately, I saved the $3,000 in unbudgeted revenue so I could fix the bathroom without any issues. Rinse and repeat yearly until I've set aside enough money to replace the roof. Then I spend the $30K to fix the roof. My budget for the next year is back down to $100,000, and I start putting money aside for new siding, which has about 5 years left in it. This is how I would run a business, and this is how I run my household. As it turns out, the city does not do this. The city takes all the unspent revenue and puts it into cash, throws it in the basement. There's 7 of us up here, so we each pick a night. Mine's Friday because I like to start the weekend off right. And Friday nights I come in here and I go to the basement, I roll around in money for about 2 hours straight because it's awesome. Or that's a complete lie, and this extremely oversimplified business example is a version of how the city is actually run. We put together multiple planning documents that aim to look out into the future, identify likely deficiencies, estimate when those deficiencies will occur and how much it will cost to remedy them, and budget accordingly. We have the facilities master plan, the water master plan, the reclaimed water master plan, the streets master plan, the parking master plan, and so forth, all culminating in the comprehensive plan. We actively solicit public input on these plans so that we identify and prioritize projects and personnel that support what the community wants in the long term. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in deficiencies and projects we're planning for up to 20 years out. Money set aside for projects not started or completed gets rolled over into the next budget year. Other items that were budgeted for but not expended also get rolled into the following year, a good example being personnel, as in we budgeted to add three police officers, but we only ended up adding 2. This unfunded expense gets rolled into the next year's fund balance, ensuring we have enough money to pay for that third officer when we're able to fill the position. Sometimes revenues are higher than projected or expenses are lower than projected. Again, this money goes into the next year's fund balance to help fund projects identified in the various master plans. Not once in my 14 years on the city council has anyone ever said, I have no idea what we're going to do with this money. It all goes to fund something that is already in the plans that were developed with public input. This methodology has allowed us to pay off debts early. City Hall and the police department were both paid off early using rollover fund balance, for example, and avoid taking on new debt when systems fail earlier than expected, saving the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest expenses over the years. Of course, sometimes revenues are lower than projected or expenses are higher than projected. One example of the latter happened recently when the bathrooms of the Chase Sports Field complex burned down earlier this year, and the city has to shell out roughly $200,000 to replace them. That's above and beyond what the insurance covered. Fortunately, the city has enough money in the fund balance to complete this unanticipated work. This, I believe, is just smart and conservative budgeting, and that's how I would run a business. On August 9th, Mr. Hogue posted on his Scott for Post Falls Facebook page that the city had an $800,000 surplus from the fiscal year 2025 budget year, stating that we had discussion, quote, finding new ways to spend it, unquote. This is incredibly misleading. That money was not surplus or profit. It was a rollover of funds that were not spent on items budgeted in fiscal year 2025. We did not, quote, find new ways to spend, unquote, anything. As Mr. Hogue put it, the discussion was centered on which projects that have already been identified long ago with the various master plans, with the exception of the failing HVAC unit system at City Hall, which is a new problem. Should these unspent dollars be budgeted in fiscal year 2025? So these unspent dollars budgeted in fiscal year 2025 go to funding in the proposed 2026 budget. Actually, it's going to be proposed as a budget amendment. Nothing is official, of course, until the City Council votes on it. Mr. Hogue claims that he would return the money to the taxpayers, but his history says otherwise. When Mr. Hogue was the chief of the PFPD, his department was often the largest recipient of fund balances. I don't ever recall him saying, no, don't spend that money in my department, just cut my budget. To be fair, I believe Mr. Hogue made very good use of the money that he got. He further claims that the city's budget has more than doubled over the last 5 years. How is that possible when we've only taken a 7% net tax increase over the last 14 years? Mr. Hogue also seems to believe that Post Falls' total budget is $159 million, as he stated in the same comment under his post, which is wildly inaccurate. It's actually under $50 million, so he's off by over 300%. AIC's errant numbers look awfully good in comparison to that. Mr. Hogue has pledged to cut $1 million in spending his first year in office, which would be really easy to do when he thinks we have $110 million more than we actually do. I wonder how he intends to spend the rest of the $109 million. In the same post, Mr. Hogue states that the City Council is contemplating a 4% tax increase this year, and, quote, this follows last year's 7% tax increase, if approved, an 11% total property tax increase in just 2 years. Yet again, Mr. Hogue has no idea what he's talking about. As I mentioned before, 3% of last year's tax increase was a one-year-only increase to pay for facilities projects. That 3% does not carry over to the coming year and does not count toward the city's basis for calculating future taxes. So even if we do approve a 4% increase for fiscal year 2026, that's 8% over 2 years, not 11. As for the 4% fiscal 2026, what he claims is what we're proposing to increase. We are bound by state law to publish a proposed budget in advance of the public hearing, and the published budget is the highest we can legally go. We can't publish a proposed budget with a 0% increase, then vote to raise taxes by 3%. That's not legal. We can publish a proposed budget showing a 4% increase and vote for a lesser amount. So the 4% discussed was the council telling city staff 4% is the highest we might be willing to go. So base your proposal on that and we'll review it. Of course, it's kind of difficult and would be incredibly irresponsible to make any decision without reviewing the proposed budget, which can't exist before we give our high water mark. We can always go lower, we can't go higher. Speaking of going higher, it has also been stated that Post Falls collects and spends more money than Coeur d'Alene. This, yet again, is a complete falsehood. In fiscal year 2024, which is the latest year for which we have complete actual numbers, Post Falls collected $15,302,447 in property taxes. Coeur d'Alene collected $27,909,515. The population of Post Falls was roughly 45,800, while the population of Coeur d'Alene was roughly 57,400. Do the math, and Post Falls collected around $334 in property taxes per capita, and Coeur d'Alene collected $486. Granted, because the two cities budget and operate differently, it's difficult to get an accurate apples-to-apples comparison. For example, Coeur d'Alene has its own library and fire department, although the bond for the Coeur d'Alene Fire Department is not included in their general fund numbers, while Post Falls does not have these things. Post Falls has its own 911 center and pays for streetlights out of the general fund, which Coeur d'Alene does not. But the notion that spending in Post Falls is wildly out of control is just plain wrong. Having mentioned that, prior to last year's tax increase, Post Falls went 13 years without one. No other city in the county can make that claim. It should be noted that the city was not always in such a good position, or such a sound position. Up until about 2000, the city basically budgeted year to year and constantly came up short. They had to literally borrow money using what's called revenue anticipation notes to make payroll for the first quarter of each fiscal year until the first property tax payment showed up at the end of January. That's not a smart way to run a business. It cost the taxpayers unnecessarily for debt service and left zero buffer to cover unanticipated expenses or lower than expected revenues. The fiscal year 1998 budget actually had to be revised mid-year to remove several projects due to lack of funds. Since then, the city has implemented impact fees to help make growth pay for itself, created and updated the various master plans mentioned before, and created the undesignated fund balance reserve, which have all been used to smartly expand and update public facilities as the city has grown, to pay off debts early, to avoid taking on debt in the first place, and to be able to handle unexpected expenses without having to throw a bake sale. Not to mention, go 13 years without an effective tax increase.
14.
This is good conservative management, and apparently Mr. Hogue and Mr. Okonowitz want us to rewind the clock 25 years. So yes, actual state revenues for fiscal year 2025 are going to come in higher than AIC errantly projected. By exactly how much is yet to be seen. The city still faces a lot of challenges. Should this council continue to plan and budget conservatively to assure the ongoing financial health of the city, or should we roll the dice and hope nothing bad happens in fiscal year 2026? Thankfully, we have an opportunity to hear from you all tonight. Finally, I fully recognize trust in government is low. Personally, I believe that that's a good thing. I'd like to point out that five of us up here, we're on the DS. The five of us up here on the DS, we're here to vote on the last budget. The other two who voted on the last budget are no longer here. But all of us were rated, vetted, and endorsed by arguably the most conservative political committee in the entire state, the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee. Mayor Jacobson and I have both been endorsed by the KCRCC multiple times. All of us voted in favor of the tax increase last year. Did the KCRCC get every single endorsement wrong? There are two options here. One, Senator Okonowitz and Mr. Hogue are correct. We're all corrupt and lining our pockets with taxpayer money, which means the KCRCC's rating and vetting system is horribly broken and should never be trusted. Or two, the KCRCC's rating and vetting system is working just fine. All five of us who were endorsed by them had solid conservative reasons for voting the way we did, and Senator Okonowitz and Mr. Hogue just don't have any idea what they're talking about when it comes to running a city. Close with the city's books are independently audited every year by an outside firm for accuracy and legality. Jason Faulkner, our Director of Finance, has been awarded the Governmental Financial Officer Award every year since he's been here, and Shelley Underwood won it many consecutive years before that. Every penny the city collects and spends is in the agenda packets and is on the city website. This is the most transparent government I've ever been a part of or ever heard of. We're not hiding anything.
Thank you, sir.